everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to film a video that honestly is one that I have been putting off making for a while now, and the reason is because I just feel like it's hard for me to tell the story because I feel really vulnerable, but also it brings up a lot of emotions that I just don't really like to think about. But I think it's so important that I share this story because this is honestly the driving force as to why I chose to start this YouTube channel, as well as why I've chosen to start the blog. So as you saw in the thumbnail, this is the video of me telling the story about my husband's brain tumor and everything that we went through with that. Again, this is a hard story for me to tell, and it's been a year now since his surgery, so we're very grateful, very thankful, but it is like flashback to emotions and memories and things, so it's difficult to tell, which again is why I feel this is why I have kind of chosen to do anything other than sit down and tell the story. But I'm here today and I'm going to tell it, and I hope that it is inspiring to somebody. If you're going through something similar, or maybe it's not even something as severe as a brain tumor, maybe it's something medical, or maybe it's not something medical, maybe it's just something hard that you're enduring in life and you need a little bit of encouragement, I hope and pray that this story will do that for you. So here we go. 1 year ago, my husband underwent brain surgery to remove a tumor from the center of his brain stem. The tumor that was found was literally in this, like the dead center of his brain stem, completely severing the brain stem. And the way that we found out was crazy. He was actually having right-sided weakness in his arm and his leg for a few months that had been going on. He wasn't having any headaches. He just was not able to use his right arm and hand like he normally could. He was dragging his right foot, and it was progressively getting worse to the point where he would like trip over it and have issues with that. And I remember when, like, this went on for a couple months, but I remember as it was getting worse, he came up to me and he was like, "Do you think I've had a stroke?" And I was like, "No, like there's no way you've had a stroke. You're young, you're healthy." He was 28 at the time. We didn't even have a primary care doctor. Like, didn't go to the doctor unless he was sick. And I was like, there's no way that you had a stroke. Also, because I have a history and work in healthcare, I have a tendency to give all my compassion to my patients. So when I come home, my family doesn't really get much from me. And so I was like, just shake it off. You're fine. You know, you're being dramatic. It's nothing. Well, anyways, this ended up progressing and continuing. And it got to the point where he could barely sign his name because he couldn't hold a pencil. He couldn't open things. He was constantly dropping stuff. And we were like, okay, let's just go to the doctor and see what it could be. Didn't think that it would be anything as significant as what it was. So we went to a walk-in clinic because, again, he did not have a primary care doctor. And as we went to the walk-in clinic, we were telling her, you know, the symptoms and everything. And she says, "I think you need to have a CT of your head." And I was just like, I mean, that's really aggressive. Do you really think that he needs a CT? And she was like, yes. So I was like, okay, fine, we'll entertain it. And we went off site, we had the CT, and then we came back home. We were told they would call us with the results, and he was working nights. So he went ahead, came home, and went to sleep. And that afternoon, she called me, and she was like, "I need to talk to your husband about his results." And I told her, I said, "Well, he's asleep because he's working tonight." And she said, "Well, he doesn't need to go to work." And I said, "What do you mean he doesn't need to go to work?" She said, "His CT came back abnormal, and we found a cyst on his brain." She kept talking, and she started explaining things. And I was like, you know what? You're going to have to stop right there. Let me go wake him up, because you're going to have to explain this to him, because I'm not hearing anything you're saying. Like, I just went blank in that moment. So I went and woke him up and gave him the phone, and he talked to her, and they decided to do a second scan, but this time would be an MRI. However, they couldn't get him in for like a month. And at this point, I began to panic, because I'm thinking, you know, this has been going on obviously for several months, and it's to the point where he is, you know, having deficits. He can barely use his right arm and his right leg, and obviously whatever it is that's on his brain is pushing on things. It's causing severe issues, so it has to be pretty serious. And so immediately I felt like we had all this lost time. And I felt like a horrible wife because I didn't listen to my husband. I mean, it's like most men, they get a man cold and you just brush it off. And so when, he comes to me and he says things like, did I have a stroke? I brushed it off. And I think that that's natural, especially when you're young and you're healthy. You don't assume something like a brain tumor. But again, it's just really hard not to take that personal and put pressure on yourself and kind of blame yourself, which doesn't help the situation. So I just started making as many phone calls as I could and reaching out to anybody who would listen to try to get him in sooner. And by the grace of God, we ended up getting a phone call and they had worked him in the very next day for the MRI. So he had the MRI, we come back, and from there, the doctor called and she's like, we need to get you in with a referral to Vanderbilt. And I was like, well, we want to see the MRI. We want to see what it's, showing. And she was very adamant. She was not going to release that report. She wouldn't tell us what it was saying. Other than at that point, she would say, and she did tell us that no longer was it like a cyst. They were calling it a cystic mass with like a sac in the center. And that it was in the center of his brainstem. And it was relatively large. So anyways, long story short, we end up I went around the block and we got a copy of his record and I sent it to my sister who's a PA in a different state and I had her read it. And so she called me back that evening and she was like, she told me basically that it was showing that the report was reading that it was possibly a glioblastoma, if I said that right, a glioblastoma. Which, if you don't know what that is, it's a very aggressive form of brain cancer. And so aggressive that, it's terminal. Like, it's not a good form of brain tumor or brain cancer that you want at all. So, when she told me that, I realized that's why the doctor didn't really want us to see the report, because until the neurologist saw the report and really and truly did the surgery, and did the pathology on the tumor, there was no true way to know exactly what it was. That was just showing preliminary on the scans. But having known that information, I felt like I wasn't sure if I should tell my husband, because I didn't tell him. I mean, after the fact, when my sister told me that he was at work, he wasn't like with me when I found out. And so I was just debating, do I call him? Do I tell him? What would I want to know? Would I want to know if I could possibly have cancer? But anyways, I decided not to because I felt like he had enough to worry about. And the facts were, whether it was or whether it wasn't, we truly wouldn't know until the surgery was complete. And after the surgery, that would determine what we did moving forward as far as treatment. So from the time we found out that he had the tumor, it took about 2 weeks to get him into surgery. Things moved very fast. And in that 2 weeks, everything fell on me as far as like getting insurance policies together and just the house in order and making sure the kids were taken care of and that he had everything that he needed preparing for surgery and after surgery, and that the house would be completely ready when he came home. We had actually just built our house and we moved in on Christmas Day, and we found out exactly 3 months later about his brain tumor. So we still had boxes everywhere, like we weren't totally settled at all, and so it was just a big mess and a big blur. But anyways, leading up to his surgery, we did all the things that they told us to do. Day of surgery, they told us that it would be about a 12-hour surgery, and this was during the thick of COVID, and so they were very strict on how many people could come in the hospital. So I was the only one that was actually able to be in there and go in with him whenever he was having the surgery for pre-op. So we went back, I think it was like 5 o'clock in the morning. We get there to the hospital and get him checked in and go back to pre-op. His surgery was supposed to start, it was either 7 or 8. It ended up didn't start for like several hours after. So we go in there to pre-op. He meets the surgeon and all the, the whole team and everything. They take him back, and I go back to the waiting room, and I'm like waiting for the call and waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, several hours yet later, I get the call that it started. And I got several calls during the surgery, but it was very few and they were very short. They weren't detailed. They weren't telling me, if they got the tumor, if they were in or anything like that. They would just say, he's doing good and he's stable. And I didn't really want to ask questions because I'm like, do I want to know? Will they even tell me over the phone? Usually, you know, after surgery, you get to meet with the surgeon and they explain things. So I kind of just sat there and I was like, I guess no news is good news. And so I just waited and waited. And again, like, because I was the only one who was able to be in there, I was just waiting in the waiting room by myself all day. And I just prayed. I tried to keep myself busy doing things. I brought my work with me and did stuff like that. But I was very nervous, obviously, and I was very scared. And so finally, it was almost 10 or so that night, maybe even later, I got the last call that they had completed the surgery and that it went well and that he was going to recovery. And so after they got him settled in recovery, I was able to speak with his surgeon, and his surgeon came out and he told me, first of all, let me explain this. His surgeon, which this was also a God thing, we ended up and got worked in with the surgeon who was the head neurosurgeon at Vanderbilt, like the top of the top, been doing it forever, and very, very, very good. So he comes out and he's like, I just want you to know that that was the hardest surgery I've ever done. And his tumor was so deep within his brainstem that I did not think he was going to survive the surgery. And I just knew if he did survive that he would have impairments on his right side and he would probably be blind. And he said, I just went in there and I saw him in his room and he gave me a thumbs up. And he had like chills down his arm. And it just made me realize, like, God's hand was on my husband that entire time. And it was on me because honestly, like, leading up to that surgery, I just envisioned myself like being a basket case, literally like crying boo-hooing the whole time, just scared to death while he was in surgery. And I felt so calm. Such like a peace was over me. And I know it was God. And it was everything to do with all of the people in our community that were praying for my husband and that were praying for me. Like, before his surgery, I think I was just kind of getting really down, feeling like there wasn't any more good people in the world because all of these bad things were happening. And as soon as my husband was diagnosed, our entire community came together. They did fundraisers, they called, they sent messages, sent cards. Like, it was just unreal, the support that we had, and it made me feel so good. And I know that those prayers from those individuals who I may never even meet, I felt them. And my husband, he felt them. Like, he was blessed by them. And anyway, so I finally get to go back there and I finally get to see him. And as I go in, of course, he's wrapped up and everything, and he's like in a lot of pain, as you would expect. And he was like, are you here? Because he didn't really open his eyes. And I was like, yeah, I'm in here, And then immediately he got sick. And so we were there for about 4 more days, and it was a very uphill battle. He had significant pain, significant sickness. His blood pressure would fluctuate. But all in all, his recovery was really, really good. And the surgeon did say they were able to get the full tumor out and that they would send it off for pathology. At that point, they still didn't know what it was. He had an idea of what it possibly was, but he couldn't say until he got the pathology report. So a few days later, he came in, and the surgeon did, and he told us that we could go home. And we would probably hear back in a week or so about the pathology, and that we would go from there as far as what the next treatment process would be. So we leave and we go home. And I'm driving, and I get a phone call. And it's actually the surgeon, and he's like, I have to call you right now because I'm so excited. The report just came in, and it was not a glioblastoma. It was actually a pilocytic astrocytoma, which is a big word. But basically, it's a benign tumor, and the chances of it coming back are very low. Obviously, he has a higher chance of developing another tumor now than someone who's never had one, but it was basically the best of a worst situation. And the surgeon himself was like so excited, which made us excited and it made us happy. And we were just praising God because that was the report we all prayed for. So we go home, and of course, he's had surgery. The tumor's out. It's not cancer, but we're not out of the woods yet. And so we get home, and he still had a full recovery because he just had a full-on craniotomy, and the recovery was rough. He was on a lot of medicines, particularly a lot of high-dose steroids, which affected his sleep. his attitude. I mean, a lot of stuff that people just don't realize. And so I stayed at home for about a week, and then I went back to work. But I stayed at home and I took care of him. And then when I went back to work, we would have his mom or somebody come and help take care of him. But the problem was, well, not really a problem, but the hard part was that he was such an active person. He was one of these people that actually run for pleasure instead of just running because you're being chased. And so to get him to sit still or lay down and rest was almost impossible. And after his surgery, because of where the tumor was, it was actually sitting on the nerve that controlled his vision. That was one of the things they said going in, that he could possibly be blind after surgery, and that they really wouldn't know until he healed completely as far as if he would regain his vision. After surgery, he had a lot of blurred vision and really difficulty seeing, but he didn't want to sit still. He couldn't watch TV because he couldn't see. He couldn't read because he couldn't see. And he just hated being inside. And so the weather, like I said, is end of April. So the weather was pretty nice, thankfully. And he was able to go outside and walk, which was the best thing for his recovery. However, I didn't let him walk alone because he couldn't see. So he would walk up and down our road multiple times a day. And I would walk with him, and I would be huffing and puffing and out of breath while he was totally fine. And we would laugh about it because I'd be like, you need to slow down, even though he's the one that's had surgery and not me. I'm like the one who's struggling. A few weeks later, we went back for a checkup, and they didn't do another scan then at that point. They just did a regular checkup, and they, after 8 weeks, released him back on light duty. And so he did that for a few more weeks until he was able to return back to work full duty. And then 6 months later, he went for his scan, which was back in October. And when he went for this scan, they did several scans actually, but he had no signs of a tumor. Everything was healing as it should, and they have bumped us up to where now we go once a year instead of twice a year to be checked and monitored. But literally, like the doctor said, it is the best of a worst case scenario. And so it's all glory to God, 100%. But it's crazy to me how when I look at him, of course you can tell he's had surgery. He has a big scar on the side of his head. But if it wasn't for that, you probably would not know. And it's just amazing to me when I look back and think about all the things that we have gone through and the things that he's gone through physically, and the way he came out on this and the way he's just not only survived but thriving. It's a blessing from God. And like I said, seeing him go through this has opened my eyes to so much. You realize what's important in life. You realize not to take things for granted, not to take people for granted. And it just opened my eyes to things, especially, like I said, in my life when it comes to my career, which is why I'm on this whole journey of, finding my career path, my passions, and all of those things. And it's been such an inspiration to me. And so going through this, even though he's the one who had the surgery, like I tell him, he had the surgery, but he's not the only one who went through this. I went through it. Our children went through it. Our family went through it. Our friends went through it. And it's been such an inspiration for me moving forward. And I feel like I could not hold this story in. I don't think God allowed us to endure this in vain. And again, like I said, I don't know if you are experiencing something similar, or maybe you know somebody who's experiencing something similar, or maybe it's nothing medical. It's just purely you feel like you're at a point in your life where you don't know what to do, and you feel like maybe you have feelings of sometimes what I have felt of this just emptiness and worthlessness, and you're like trying to navigate life and figure out where to go. Like, honestly, this has shown me and opened up my eyes that you need to turn to God. You need to trust in him because he has a plan for you and he cares for us. And seeing my husband in the way that God showed favor on him, and he'll do that for you too. And I know he'll do it for me, and he's done it for my family. And so I couldn't keep this story in anymore. As hard as it is to tell, and yes, it brings back a lot of flashbacks. There's a lot of memories. There's a lot of really tough times that a lot of times we just don't want to talk about. But the reality is, if this could help one person, then it's worth it. And that's why I've started the blog. And on my blog, I will also have a written portion about this story, which I'll go more in depth there too. So once my blog is ready and launched, I hope y'all will definitely check that out and read it. But again, I couldn't keep this to myself. And plus, it was a beautiful ending to something that was very scary that I hope and pray we never have to go through again. And if you do walk through waters like that, then I will be praying that God will show favor on you too. And if it's, again, not anything medical, then just know that it doesn't matter. Like, God loves you, and we need to trust in Him and have faith in Him with our life. So I'm going to get back to making other fun videos that are a little bit lighter, but I just could not share it. And so I hope that you all will continue watching, because I have fun videos planned ahead. And until next time, I'm going to get to it. Bye, guys.